The moment Clarence Mitchell stepped into Rising Phoenix Karate Academy, leaning on his cane, the laughter began. Students exchanged knowing glances as the 70-year-old man fumbled with his oversized GI, struggling to tie the white belt around his waist. Sensei Daniel watched with barely concealed impatience, while Ethan and Caleb, the dojo's alpha males, staged a cruel imitation of his movements. None of them bothered to look closely at his eyes. Calm, observant, missing nothing. None thought to question why his mistakes were so precisely inconsistent. They saw only what they expected, a confused old man out of his depth, not the legendary Iron Fist who once dominated Japan's most elite tournaments. Their mockery would continue for weeks. Each snicker and side-eye unknowingly pulled at threads that, when finally unraveled, would expose the formidable master hiding in plain sight. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the strip mall parking lot as Clarence Mitchell stepped carefully from his weathered sedan. At 70, he moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned to respect his body's limitations. A plaid jacket draped over his shoulders and a wooden cane supported his right side. Despite the slight tremor in his hands, his eyes remained sharp, taking in every detail of the storefront before him. Rising Phoenix Karate Academy read the blue and silver sign, complete with a phoenix silhouette mid-flight. Clarence adjusted his glasses and straightened his back before pushing open the glass door. The reception area smelled of sweat and disinfectant. A young man with neatly cropped brown hair looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion as he took in Clarence's appearance. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, his tone suggesting he doubted he could. Clarence offered a warm smile. "Yes, son. I was hoping to observe a class today. I've been thinking about taking up martial arts." The receptionist, his nameplate reading Jordan, blinked twice before responding. "You want to take karate?" He glanced at Clarence's cane, then back to his face. "That's right." Clarence's voice was soft but firm. "Is that possible?" Jordan seemed to struggle with the response. Let me check with the manager. You can have a seat if you'd like." Clarence nodded and lowered himself onto a bench along the wall. Through the large viewing window, he could see a class in progress. About 15 students, mostly teenagers and young adults, moved in synchronized patterns across the polished wood floor. They shouted with each punch and kick, their white uniforms snapping with each movement. At the front stood a man in his 40s with a black belt wrapped around his waist. His dark hair was cropped close to his scalp, and his voice carried throughout the room as he barked commands. "Again, stronger. Feel the power in your core." Sensei Daniel Harper paced the front of the class, his eyes scanning each student critically. Clarence watched with quiet intensity, his hands folded over his cane. The class continued for another 20 minutes before Daniel clapped his hands together. "Line up, bow." The students formed neat rows, bowed in unison, then broke into casual conversation as they began collecting their belongings. Clarence rose slowly and made his way to the entrance of the training floor. Daniel was wiping his brow with a small towel when he noticed him standing there. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his professional smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I hope so," Clarence replied. "I'm interested in joining your beginner's class." Before Daniel could respond, a stocky young man with a buzz cut snickered loudly behind him. "Sir, the bingo hall is that way." He pointed toward the far end of the strip mall, where a community center hosted various senior activities. Several other students laughed, including a tall, athletic young man who seemed to be the first boy's friend. Daniel's smile faltered. "Ethan," he said, his tone carrying a half-hearted warning. Ethan shrugged, grabbing his gym bag. "Just trying to help him find a right place, Sensei." Daniel turned back to Clarence, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, our program is pretty physically demanding. I'm not sure it would be appropriate for someone of your age." Clarence finished for him, his smile never wavering. "Well, yes," Daniel admitted. "Rick," a sharp voice cut through the conversation. A woman in her 30s with blonde hair, pulled into a tight ponytail, approached from the office. "I'm Laura Bennett, business manager for Rising Phoenix. Is there something we can help you with?" Clarence shook her hand firmly. "Clarence Mitchell." I'm interested in joining your beginner's karate class. Laura's professional smile remained fixed, but her eyes betrayed her skepticism. Mr. Mitchell, while we appreciate your interest, I think Daniel is right to be concerned. Our program is designed for people with different physical capabilities. I understand your concern, Clarence said, but I'm not looking to compete in tournaments. I'm simply looking for some light fitness and discipline. I think karate could provide that for me. Laura glanced at Daniel, then back to Clarence. Well, our policy is inclusivity, of course, she said, lowering her voice. But we have to consider liability issues. Perhaps Tai Chi would be more appropriate. The community center offers. I specifically want to learn karate, Clarence insisted gently. If it doesn't work out, I'll be the first to admit it. Daniel and Laura exchanged looks. Clarence couldn't help but notice the silent communication between them. Laura's slight nod, Daniel's reluctant sigh. We could use the enrollment, Laura whispered, just loud enough for Clarence to hear. And it would look good for our community outreach. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Fine, we can start you with a trial period. The beginner class meets Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4. Uniform rental is included in your first month. Thank you, Clarence said, his smile genuine. I appreciate the opportunity. Jordan will get you set up with the paperwork, Laura said, already turning back toward her office. Daniel, we need to discuss the weekend tournament. As Daniel followed, Clarence made his way back to the reception area. He could feel the stares of the lingering students, could hear their whispers. 20 minutes later, with paperwork completed and payment processed, Jordan handed Clarence a folded white uniform. This is the smallest adult GI we have, he said. The locker room is through there if you want to try it on. Clarence thanked him and made his way to the men's locker room. Inside, he found a young man with short black hair, changing out of his GI. The boy looked up, surprised to see Clarence. Hello, Clarence said warmly. I'm new here. Oh, The boy seemed unsure how to respond. I'm Lucas, Clarence Mitchell. Pleased to meet you. Lucas nodded awkwardly and continued gathering his things. Clarence found a bench and carefully unfolded the white uniform. It was clearly several sizes too large, but it would have to do. He slipped it on over his clothes, struggling somewhat with the stiff fabric. The white belt proved particularly challenging as he tried to remember the proper way to tie it from watching the other students. When he emerged from the locker room, several students from the previous class were still lingering. Ethan and his tall friend, Caleb, were among them, and they made no effort to hide their amusement at Clarence's appearance. Check it out, Caleb, Ethan said loudly. Grandpa's ready for battle. Caleb laughed. The belt's not even right. It's upside down or something. Clarence approached Daniel, who was setting up for the next class. Is this correct? He asked, gesturing to his belt. Daniel glanced at him, then quickly adjusted the belt. There you go. Let's have you join today's class, since you're already here. Just follow along as best you can. The beginner's class was smaller than the advanced one Clarence had observed earlier. Most of the students were teenagers or young adults, with a few in their 30s. Clarence was by far the oldest person in the room. Daniel positioned him in the back row. Basic stances today, he announced to the class. We'll start with front stance. Clarence watched carefully as Daniel demonstrated, then attempted to mimic his position. His knees protested as he tried to bend into the stance, and his balance wavered. He had to use his cane to stabilize himself several times. No canes on the training floor, Daniel called out. If you need it, maybe this isn't the right activity for you. Clarence nodded, setting his cane against the wall. He wobbled back to his position, moving more slowly now. As the class progressed through various stances and basic punches, Clarence struggled visibly. His movements were stiff and awkward, his timing consistently off when they practiced simple blocks. He seemed to forget the sequences, dropping into wrong stances or moving in the opposite direction from everyone else. He could hear the snickers, could feel the side eyes from both students and instructor, but he persisted, his face a mask of concentration. After class, as students filtered out, Clarence approached Daniel. Despite the humiliation he had endured, he bowed deeply to him, showing proper dojo etiquette. Thank you, Sensei, he said. I look forward to improving. Daniel seemed taken aback by his formality and composure. Right? Well, see you Wednesday then. In the locker room, Clarence could hear Ethan and Caleb in the adjacent area, their voices carrying through the thin wall. Did you see him trying to do the horse stance? Ethan's voice mocked, like a newborn giraffe. Caleb's deeper voice followed with a high-pitched imitation. Thank you, sensei. Like he's in some old kung fu movie. Lucas's voice cut in, quieter but clear. Come on, guys. That's enough. What? You're defending him now? Ethan challenged. He doesn't belong here, and you know it. Whatever, Lucas responded. I've got to go. Clarence changed quietly, folding the GI neatly before returning it to Jordan at the front desk. He walked to his car with dignity, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the asphalt. The drive home was silent. No radio, no distractions, just the steady hum of the engine and the weight of the day's events. Clarence Mitchell's apartment was in a modest building on the quieter side of town. The one-bedroom unit was neat and sparsely decorated, with furniture that had seen better days but was well-maintained. Photos lined a small bookshelf. Clarence in his youth, a striking woman with her arm around him, the two of them in front of various landmarks around the world. He moved through the space with practiced familiarity, preparing a simple dinner and eating it at his small kitchen table. Afterward, he walked to the bedroom closet and pulled out a carved wooden box from the top shelf. Sitting on the edge of his bed, Clarence opened the box carefully. Inside lay a faded black belt, the fabric worn but the color still deep. Next to it was a weathered photograph, the colors muted with age. In it, a younger Clarence stood proudly among a group of men in martial arts uniforms, all bearing black belts. Behind them hung a Japanese flag. Clarence traced his fingers over the faces in the photo, lingering on his own youthful image. His expression was solemn, his posture perfect, his eyes filled with a fire that still flickered, however faintly, in his aged face. He closed the box without a word, returned it to its place, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to remember who he once was and perhaps who he might become again. 2 days later, Clarence returned to Rising Phoenix Karate Academy for his second class. He arrived early, his GI neatly folded in a canvas bag, his face composed despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. The memory of the snickers and side eyes from his first class lingered, but so did his determination. Jordan barely looked up as Clarence entered. "They're starting in 15 minutes, he said, gesturing toward the locker room. Clarence changed quickly, managing the belt with slightly more confidence this time. When he emerged onto the training floor, a few students were already warming up, including Lucas, who offered a hesitant smile. "Hello again," Clarence said, approaching the young man. "Lucas, right?" Lucas nodded. "Yes. How are you feeling after Monday's class?" "First sessions can be rough. A bit sore," Clarence admitted with a chuckle, "but nothing that won't heal." He noticed Lucas struggling with his stance as he practiced a basic front kick. The boy's balance was off, his weight distributed incorrectly. "May I?" Clarence asked gently. Lucas looked uncertain but nodded. "Try placing your foot here," Clarence suggested, pointing to a spot slightly to the left of where Lucas had positioned himself. "And remember to breathe. The power comes from here." He lightly touched Lucas's diaphragm. "Not from your legs." Lucas adjusted his stance, took a deep breath, and executed the kick again. This time, his balance held steady, and the kick had more force behind it. "That's better," Lucas said, surprised. "Thanks." Before Clarence could respond, Daniel called the class to order. They lined up, bowed, and began the session with basic punching drills. Clarence moved slowly, but with more coordination than he had shown in the first class, though he still appeared to struggle with certain movements. Halfway through the class, Daniel paired students for light contact sparring. Clarence found himself without a partner until Caleb stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'll work with the new guy," he announced loudly. Daniel looked uncertain. "Be careful, Caleb. Light contact only." "Of course, Sensei." Caleb's tone was innocent, but his eyes gleamed with mischief. Ethan, watching from nearby, gave Caleb a thumbs up. The pair spread out across the floor. Caleb squared off against Clarence, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. Clarence stood in a basic stance, his guard up, but his posture stiff and awkward. "Ready, Grandpa?" Caleb asked, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Clarence nodded. "Ready." Caleb threw a light jab, clearly pulling his punch. Clarence attempted to step aside, but moved too slowly. The punch grazed his shoulder. He tried to counter with a basic block and punch combination, but his timing was off, his movements clumsy. "Come on," Caleb taunted. "Even my little brother hits harder than that." He threw another punch, this one a bit faster. Clarence shuffled awkwardly to the side, nearly losing his balance. Caleb followed with a light kick that tapped his hip, causing him to stumble backward. Several students had stopped their own sparring to watch, including Ethan, who was openly laughing now. "Caleb," Daniel called from across the room, his tone carrying a warning. "Keep it appropriate. Just teaching the basics, sensei," Caleb replied innocently. He continued to dance around Clarence, throwing controlled strikes that he either blocked poorly or failed to avoid entirely. Each time he stumbled or winced, Ethan and a few others would snicker. Lucas watched with a frown, his own sparring partner forgotten. Daniel finally approached and ended the session. "That's enough sparring for today," he announced. "Let's move on to kata practice." As the class reformed into lines, Clarence caught his breath, his face flushed from exertion, but his eyes calm. Caleb returned to Ethan's side, both of them mimicking his movements and laughing. "Dude, did you see his face when you got him with that roundhouse?" Ethan whispered a little too loudly. Lucas shot them a disapproving look, but said nothing. After class, Clarence thanked Daniel once again with a formal bow. He acknowledged him with a nod, though his expression remained neutral, betraying neither approval nor disdain. The following day, Lucas found himself at the public library after school, researching karate history for a social studies project. He browsed through the sports section, pulling out books on martial arts from different eras. As he flipped through a book on American martial arts pioneers, a name caught his eye: Clarence Mitchell. Curious, he read the brief paragraph. Among the few Americans to train in Japan during the early 1970s, Clarence Mitchell, pictured below with the Saito School champions, earned the respect of traditionalists through his dedication and natural talent. His competitive career was cut short after the controversial Tokyo Open of 1974, where the paragraph ended there, continuing on the next page, which had been torn out. The reference photo was missing as well. Lucas stared at the text, his mind racing. Could this be the same Clarence? The elderly man fumbling through basic stances at Rising Phoenix? He checked out the book and spent the evening searching online for more information, but found little beyond a few mentions in archived martial arts forums, references to Iron Fist Mitchell and the Tokyo scandal. That evening, in his modest apartment, Clarence stood before his bathroom mirror, his shirt partially lifted to reveal a long, jagged scar that ran across his abdomen. The tissue was puckered and pale, a permanent reminder of violence endured long ago. He traced the scar with his fingertips, his expression solemn. Then he closed his eyes and performed a breathing exercise, slow, deliberate inhales and exhales that gradually deepened, his body relaxing with each breath. Across town, an elderly Japanese man in an impeccably tailored gray suit sat in a rental car parked with a clear view of Rising Phoenix Karate Academy. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture perfect even in the confines of the vehicle. On the passenger seat lay a file folder containing newspaper clippings, photographs, and what appeared to be official documents, all featuring Clarence Mitchell in his younger years. The man checked his watch, then started the car and drove away, his face impassive, but his eyes alert, missing nothing. The next day's class at Rising Phoenix Karate Academy was more crowded than usual. A promotional event had brought in several potential new students, and Sensei Daniel was in full performance mode, demonstrating flashy kicks and breaks for the audience. Clarence Mitchell arrived in his now familiar, too large GI, taking his place at the back of the class. He noticed immediately that something had changed in the dynamics of the dojo. Students who had previously ignored him now whispered as he passed. Ethan and Caleb were huddled together, occasionally glancing his way and snickering. Daniel seemed distracted during the warm-up, his instructions less precise than usual. Several times, he had to correct himself after giving contradictory commands. Front stance. No horse stance. Focus people. As the class moved through basic drills, Clarence noticed a disturbing pattern. Several students, particularly those in Ethan and Caleb's circle, were subtly mimicking his movements, exaggerating his stiffness, his occasional balance issues, his careful pace. Daniel grew increasingly frustrated as he lost control of the class. "This is a karate dojo, not a comedy club," he snapped after catching two younger students imitating Clarence's bow. During a water break, Lucas approached Clarence. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "They're just immature." Ethan, overhearing, stepped closer. "What was that?" Lucas taking Grandpa's side now. Lucas straightened his spine. "His name is Mr. Mitchell, and yes, I am. You guys need to back off." Caleb joined them, towering over Lucas. "You might want to remember who your friends are. And you might want to remember basic respect," Lucas countered, his voice stronger than he felt. Ethan leaned in, his voice low. "Keep interfering, and I'll remind you of your place." "Got it." Lucas stepped back, his confidence faltering under the glare. Clarence watched the exchange silently, his eyes missing nothing. After class, Daniel was approached by Laura, who had been observing from her office window. "We need to talk," she said, her tone clipped. "The new reviews are coming in." Daniel followed her into the office, where she showed him a tablet displaying recent online ratings for the dojo. "Trendy, but directionless," she read aloud. "Instructors allow bullying. More focused on image than discipline. This is not what we want associated with our brand." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "It's been a tough month. We lost 3 advanced students to that new MMA gym across town, and the tournament results weren't great. And now we have disruptions in class," Laura added pointedly. "Your newest student is becoming a liability." "You're the one who pushed for inclusivity," Daniel reminded her. "Inclusivity is good for the brand. Disruption is not." Laura closed the tablet cover with a snap. "Fix it." Later that afternoon, a few beginner students stayed for additional practice. Clarence was among them, working on a basic kata in the corner of the dojo. A young boy of about 12 was struggling with a sequence nearby, his frustration evident in his increasingly sloppy movements. After watching for a moment, Clarence approached him. "May I offer a suggestion?" The boy looked at him uncertainly but nodded. "Your weight is shifting too early," Clarence explained, demonstrating the correct foot placement. "Feel your connection to the ground first, then move." The boy tried again, following his guidance. His execution was immediately cleaner, more stable. "That's it," Clarence encouraged. "Much better." Daniel, who had been observing from across the room, walked over. "That's a pretty precise correction for someone who just started karate," he said, his tone questioning. Clarence smiled mildly. "Old habits die hard, I suppose." "What does that mean exactly?" Daniel pressed. Clarence's expression revealed nothing. Simply that good posture and balance are universal principles. "I may be new to karate, but I've lived in this body for 70 years. You learn a thing or two." Daniel seemed unsatisfied with the answer, but was called away to assist another student. Clarence returned to his kata practice, his movements deliberately unrefined, but his eyes sharp and aware. That evening, as darkness fell over the city, Clarence sat alone in his living room, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside him. The telephone rang, breaking the silence. He answered it on the 3rd ring. "Moshi Moshi," he said, the Japanese greeting flowing naturally from his lips. The voice that responded was male, elderly, speaking in rapid Japanese. Clarence listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. "Hi," he replied finally. "Wakata." "Yes, I understand." He hung up, sat motionless for several long moments, then rose and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalk. In the distance, a car engine started, then faded away. "They're watching," the voice had said. "Are you ready to stop pretending?" Clarence stared into the darkness, his reflection in the window glass revealing the face of a man who had carried secrets for decades and who now stood at the crossroads of revelation. The past, it seemed, had finally caught up with him. The morning light filtered through the windows of Rising Phoenix as students filed in for the Monday class. Clarence arrived early, his movements more confident as he changed into his GI and tied his white belt. The past week had established a routine, though hardly a comfortable one. Daniel was demonstrating a new sparring drill, having students form a circle while two participants practiced in the center. Remember, control is key, he emphasized. This isn't about hurting your partner. It's about technique. When Clarence's turn came, he stepped into the circle opposite a younger woman named Hannah. As they bowed to each other, Ethan extended his foot just enough to catch Clarence's heel. He stumbled forward, nearly falling flat before catching himself. "Sorry," Ethan said with exaggerated innocence. "Total accident." Caleb snickered from across the circle, exchanging a fist bump with Ethan when Daniel wasn't looking. Clarence straightened himself, brushed off his GI, and looked directly at Ethan. Instead of anger or embarrassment, he simply chuckled, a warm, knowing sound that somehow made Ethan shift uncomfortably. "No harm done," Clarence said, turning back to his sparring partner. The session continued without further incident, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Ethan's prank hadn't produced the humiliation he'd expected, and Clarence's reaction left him unsettled rather than satisfied. After class, as students gathered their belongings, Lucas approached Ethan by the water fountain. "That was a real jerk move," he said, loudly enough for nearby students to hear. Ethan turned, water dripping from his chin. "What's your problem?" "My problem is watching you act like a bully to someone who's done nothing to you." Lucas crossed his arms. "He deserves the same respect as anyone else here." Caleb joined them, towering over Lucas. "Since when are you the dojo police? Since when is basic human decency optional?" Lucas shot back. A small crowd had formed, watching the confrontation with interest. Daniel noticed the gathering from across the room, but made no move to intervene, instead busying himself with straightening equipment. Ethan leaned closer to Lucas. "You know what? You're right. Next time, I'll make sure to trip him harder. Maybe he'll finally get the message that he doesn't belong here." "That's enough." The voice came from behind them. Clarence, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. "Lucas, thank you for your concern, but I can handle myself." He turned to Ethan and Caleb. "Young men, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in your training. Clearly, it's not peace of mind." With that, he walked away, leaving Ethan red-faced and Caleb unusually quiet. That night, the city park was empty, save for a few late joggers and a homeless man dozing on a distant bench. The moon cast silver light across the open grass where a solitary figure moved in the shadows of an ancient oak tree. Clarence, dressed in loose black pants and a fitted tank top, flowed through movements that bore no resemblance to the awkward fumbling he displayed at Rising Phoenix. His kata was precise, elegant, a perfect synthesis of power and grace. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground as he executed complex turns, his arms cutting through the air with controlled force. In these movements, decades fell away. There was no tremor in his hands, no stiffness in his joints. Each technique flowed seamlessly into the next, his breathing deep and measured, his focus absolute. Hidden behind a cluster of rhododendrons, Lucas watched in astonishment. He had come to the park to run off his frustration after the confrontation with Ethan, never expecting to encounter his elderly classmate, especially not like this. He remained motionless, afraid that any movement would break the spell of the moment. As Clarence completed his kata, he paused, centering himself with a deep breath. Then, to Lucas's horror, he turned and looked directly at the bushes where Lucas was hiding. "You can come out now," Clarence called softly. "The mosquitoes will eat you alive in there." Lucas emerged sheepishly, brushing leaves from his running shorts. "I'm sorry. I wasn't spying. I just—" "Yes, you were," Clarence said, but there was no anger in his voice. "And that's all right. Sometimes the truth needs witnesses." Lucas struggled for words. "That wasn't what you show in class." "No," Clarence agreed. "It wasn't." "Why?" Lucas asked. "Why pretend you can barely do a front stance when you can move like that?" Clarence sat on a nearby bench, gesturing for Lucas to join him. Some questions are better left unanswered, at least for now. I found something, Lucas said after a moment of silence. At the library, a book about martial arts history. It mentioned someone named Clarence Mitchell who trained in Japan in the 70s. That's you, isn't it? Clarence's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or caution. The past is complicated, Lucas, he said. Sometimes it's best to let it die. But it's late, Clarence interrupted gently. You should get home. Your parents will worry. As if to emphasize his point, he rose and collected his small bag from beneath the tree. Whatever you think you saw tonight, I'd appreciate if you kept it to yourself. Lucas nodded slowly, knowing he'd witnessed something extraordinary, but unsure what to make of it. As Clarence walked away, his posture once again adopted the slight stoop he maintained at the dojo, a mask slipping back into place. The images from the park haunted Lucas's dreams that night, intermingling with fragments from an old martial arts documentary he'd watched years ago. In his dream, a younger Clarence Mitchell stood victorious in a tournament ring, his hand raised by a referee while a defeated opponent bowed in respect. Tokyo, 1972. The underground circuit was thriving. Unregistered matches held in warehouses and basements, away from the sanctioned tournaments with their rules and limitations. These were the fights that built reputations, where legends were born and broken. Clarence Mitchell, 20 years old and fearless, faced his opponent across the chalk circle. He was Japanese, at least 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier, with a reputation for breaking bones. The crowd, mostly men, mostly betting against him, watched with anticipation as he assumed his stance. The American guy will fall in 30 seconds, someone called in Japanese. The American guy understands you, Clarence replied in perfect Japanese, his eyes never leaving his opponent. When the signal came, the man attacked with devastating speed. Clarence didn't retreat. He stepped into the assault, redirecting the energy and finding the spaces between his techniques. His counterstrike was precise, a single palm heel to the sternum that sent the man staggering backward. The crowd fell silent as the match continued, their shock growing as this foreign man systematically dismantled their champion. His final technique was a sweep followed by a perfectly placed strike that stopped just short of his opponent's throat. "Iron Fist," someone shouted, and the nickname spread through the crowd like wildfire. The memory dream faded as Lucas's alarm blared, pulling him back to the present. At Rising Phoenix later that day, the usual dynamics were in play. Ethan was showing off for a group of younger students, demonstrating flashy kicks that looked impressive but lacked proper foundation. Caleb was in the corner, his face unusually serious as he worked through a kata with mechanical precision. Laura emerged from her office just as Daniel was preparing to start class. "Daniel," a word she called, beckoning him over. Their conversation was hushed but intense. Lucas, filling his water bottle nearby, caught fragments. Found in his locker, tournament rules handle it quietly. When they separated, Laura's face was flushed with anger while Daniel looked troubled. Ethan was called into the office moments later, emerging pale and shaken. Class proceeded normally, with Clarence once again playing his role as the struggling elderly student. Lucas watched him with new eyes, noticing the subtle control behind each mistake, the precision with which he maintained his charade. After class, Caleb approached Clarence as he was gathering his things. "I wanted to apologize," he said stiffly. "For yesterday, the trip. It was stupid." Clarence regarded him thoughtfully. "Apology accepted, but I'm curious why the change of heart." Caleb glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "My dad saw you yesterday. Your father, Greg Nelson. He used to fight MMA before it was mainstream. He never made it big, but he knows his stuff." Caleb's words came out in a rush. "He was picking me up and saw you walk into your car. He said you move like someone who's trained for decades, that your posture and awareness aren't things that can be faked." Clarence's expression remained neutral. "Your father sounds observant. He's also a complete jerk who thinks I'll never amount to anything," Caleb added bitterly. "Last night, He spent an hour telling me how pathetic my form is compared to some old guy in my dojo. Understanding dawned in Clarence's eyes. Ah, so your apology is not because of what he said, Caleb insisted quickly. It's because I don't know, maybe I don't want to be like him. Before Clarence could respond, the front door opened, and an elderly Japanese man in an immaculate suit entered the dojo. The receptionist, Jordan, looked up, startled by his formal appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I am here to observe," the man replied, his English precise but heavily accented. Daniel emerged from the back, his eyebrows rising at the sight of the visitor. "Are you with the local newspaper? We've been expecting someone to cover our upcoming tournament." The man bowed slightly. "I am Hiroshi Sato. I am here for personal interest." At the sound of his name, Clarence froze. He was partially hidden behind a display case of trophies, but his eyes locked with Hiroshi's across the room. A moment of silent recognition passed between them. Daniel, oblivious to the exchange, guided Hiroshi to a seat along the wall. "Well, you're welcome to watch. We have an advanced class starting in 15 minutes. Clarence slipped out the side door, but Hiroshi followed shortly after, catching up to him in the parking lot. "Clarence," he said softly. Clarence turned, his posture straightening subtly. "Hiroshi, it's been a long time." 41 years, 7 months, Hiroshi confirmed. "Since Tokyo?" A shadow crossed Clarence's face. "Why are you here?" "People will learn who you are," Hiroshi said, his voice low and urgent. "Are you ready for the consequences?" Clarence looked back at the dojo, then to the horizon beyond. "I'm done running from ghosts, Hiroshi. They find you anyway." Inside the dojo, Lucas was preparing for the advanced class when he spotted Clarence and the Japanese visitor talking in the parking lot. Their body language suggested an old acquaintance, formal but familiar. After class, Lucas approached Clarence as he was leaving. "Mr. Mitchell," he called. "I need to talk to you." Clarence paused, his expression guarded. "Yes, Lucas." Lucas pulled the library book from his backpack, opening it to the page about American martial artists in Japan. "This is you, isn't it?" The paragraph mentions the Tokyo Open of 1974, but the next page was torn out. "What happened there? And who's the man you were talking to earlier?" Clarence gently closed the book. "Some doors are better left shut, Lucas," he said, but his tone was kind rather than dismissive. "Focus on your own journey." As Lucas watched Clarence walk away, he felt a presence behind him. It was Caleb, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. "What was that about?" he asked. Lucas hesitated, then decided to trust his instinct. "I think there's more to Mr. Mitchell than he's letting on." Caleb nodded slowly. "My dad said something similar. He mentioned an old martial arts documentary he watched years ago, something about American pioneers in Japan. He said his movement patterns are identical to footage he saw." They stood in silence for a moment, two unlikely allies united by a growing mystery. Across town, in the administrative office of Rising Phoenix, Laura sat alone reviewing security camera footage. On her screen, Ethan could be seen opening his locker, removing a small bottle of pills, and quickly pocketing them before looking around nervously. Laura paused the footage, then deleted the file. She picked up her phone and dialed. "We need to talk about the tournament," she said when the call connected. "We have a situation that could damage the brand." The next morning, a notice appeared on the dojo bulletin board. "Attention all students. Challenge Day. This Friday, 6 p.m. Showcase your skills against fellow students and instructors. Friends and family welcome. Special demonstration matches to be announced." At the bottom, in Laura's neat handwriting, a note had been added, featuring confidence-building exercise, Sensei Daniel versus Mr. Mitchell. When Ethan saw it, he laughed out loud. "Oh man, this is going to be epic. The old guy's going to get demolished." Nearby, Clarence read the announcement with a calm expression. When Ethan's comment reached his ears, he simply turned and smiled. "I accept," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Friday evening arrived with an air of anticipation. Rising Phoenix had been transformed for Challenge Day. Extra seating lined the walls, a judge's table had been set up at the front, and a large mat covered the center of the training floor. Strings of paper lanterns cast a warm glow over the space, adding a theatrical touch to the proceedings. By 6 o'clock, the dojo was packed. Parents, siblings, and friends of students filled every available seat. To Laura's delight, a reporter from the local newspaper had arrived, camera in hand, ready to document the event for the community section. Daniel moved through the crowd in his formal black GI, a blue headband tied around his forehead, his signature look for demonstrations. His smile was confident, his handshake firm as he greeted parents and potential new students. "This is excellent publicity," Laura whispered as she passed him, tablet in hand. "I've already received 3 new membership inquiries." In the men's locker room, Clarence changed into his GI with methodical precision. He could hear the excited chatter from the main floor, the occasional burst of laughter or applause as preliminary matches took place. Lucas entered, already dressed for his own match. "Mr. Mitchell, are you okay?" Clarence looked up with a serene smile. "Perfectly fine, son. Just preparing myself. You know this is Laura's way of humiliating you, right? Daniel is a 5th-degree black belt. He was state champion 3 years running. Was he now?" Clarence's tone was mild, almost amused. "How interesting." Lucas hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You don't have to do this. You could say you're not feeling well, or I never run from a challenge." "Lucas," Clarence said, tying his white belt with practiced ease, especially one so graciously offered. The preliminary matches proceeded smoothly. Students, paired by rank and age, demonstrated their skills in light contact sparring and kata performances. Caleb won his match against a boy from the intermediate class, his techniques solid if uninspired. Ethan, to everyone's surprise, was eliminated early after an overly aggressive attack left him vulnerable to a counter. Hiroshi Sato sat in the front row, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. Occasionally, his eyes would meet Clarence's across the room, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Daniel stepped to the center of the mat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special demonstration match tonight. As part of our commitment to inclusivity, we like to show that karate is for everyone, regardless of age or background." A murmur ran through the crowd as Clarence made his way to the mat, his white belt a stark contrast to Daniel's black. "Mr. Mitchell joined us recently and has shown great enthusiasm," Daniel continued. "Tonight he'll demonstrate a kata from our intermediate curriculum, followed by a light sparring session with me." The crowd applauded politely, though several exchanged confused glances. Parents leaned toward each other, whispering behind their hands. "First, the kata," Daniel announced. "This is Han Sandan, typically taught to students at the brown belt level. I'll demonstrate first, then Mr. Mitchell will attempt a simplified version." Daniel moved to the center of the mat and performed the kata with precision and power, his movements sharp and dynamic. The crowd applauded appreciatively. Then it was Clarence's turn. He took his place at the center, assumed the starting position, and began. His first few movements were hesitant, almost clumsy, exactly what everyone expected. A few snickers came from Ethan's corner of the room. Laura's smile was satisfied, her phone raised to capture the moment. Then something shifted. Midway through the kata, Clarence's posture straightened. His movements became more fluid, more precise. Each technique flowed seamlessly into the next, his breathing deep and controlled, his focus absolute. The snickers died away. The dojo fell silent, except for the whisper of Clarence's GI as he moved through the air with unexpected grace. By the final sequence, he was performing at a level that clearly surpassed Daniel's demonstration. His final stance was rock solid, his ki sharp and powerful, echoing through the stunned silence of the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then, hesitantly, applause began, scattered at first, then growing as the audience processed what they had witnessed. Daniel stood frozen, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Laura's phone had lowered, her mouth slightly open. In the front row, Hiroshi nodded almost imperceptibly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. The stunned silence in Rising Phoenix Karate Academy lingered as Clarence Mitchell stood at the center of the mat, his kata performance still echoing in the minds of the onlookers. Sensei Daniel Harper cleared his throat, his voice betraying a hint of unease. Well, that was unexpected. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Let's move on to the sparring demonstration. Clarence and Daniel faced each other on the mat, bowed, and assumed fighting stances. Daniel's was textbook perfect, aggressive, forward-leaning. Clarence's was subtle, deceptively simple, his weight distributed evenly. Remember, this is light contact only, Daniel said, loud enough for the audience to hear. I'll adjust my level to make this a learning experience. Clarence simply nodded. At the signal to begin, Daniel moved forward with a testing jab, clearly holding back. Clarence didn't move. Didn't need to. The punch fell short by precisely 1 inch. Daniel frowned and tried again, this time with a combination. Jab, cross, front kick. Clarence swayed slightly, each technique missing by the narrowest margin without him appearing to dodge. The audience leaned forward in their seats, sensing something extraordinary. Daniel's next attack was faster, less controlled. A roundhouse kick followed by a reverse punch. Clarence finally moved, not backward but forward, inside Daniel's guard. He didn't strike. He simply occupied the space Daniel needed, making his techniques collapse in on themselves. Frustration flashed across Daniel's face. He launched a more aggressive combination, abandoning the pretense of a teaching exercise. Clarence remained calm, his defense impenetrable. He moved like mist around Daniel's techniques, always just beyond reach, never retreating. The match continued for 2 full minutes, Daniel growing increasingly disoriented by his inability to land a single technique. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his breathing labored, while Clarence remained composed, almost serene. Finally, Daniel overextended on a lunging punch. In that moment of imbalance, Clarence moved. His hand flashed out, a palm strike so soft it was barely visible, touching Daniel's wrist with surgical precision. Daniel's hand opened involuntarily, his stance crumbled, and he stumbled forward, catching himself just before falling. The dojo went completely silent for several heartbeats. No one moved. Then Ethan's voice broke the spell. "That's nonsense," he shouted, standing up. "He got lucky." He stormed onto the mat. "Let me show you how it's done. I'm not going to hold back like Sensei did." Before Daniel could intervene, Hiroshi Sato rose from his seat and stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, carried a quiet authority that silenced the room. "You will show respect," he said, each word precise and measured. "You stand in the presence of Clarence Inoue Mitchell, 6-time All-Japan men's karate champion and direct student of Master Kenjiro Saito, my father." Daniel's face drained of color as recognition dawned. "Iron Fist Mitchell," he whispered, "the Tokyo legend." Laura pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with anger. "What is going on here, Daniel? Are you in on this? Is this some publicity stunt?" Daniel shook his head slowly, still staring at Clarence with new eyes. "No, we've had a living legend in our dojo, and I never saw it." Clarence stood quietly at the center of the storm, his posture now fully revealed as that of a master, straight-backed, dignified, powerful. Lucas stepped forward, unable to contain himself any longer. "I knew it. The book was right. You were famous." Caleb approached more cautiously, studying Clarence with newfound respect. "My dad's going to lose his mind when I tell him who you really are." Ethan remained defiant, though confusion had replaced some of his anger. If he's so great, why was he pretending to be a beginner? Why lie to everyone? "Some questions deserve answers," Clarence said, his voice carrying through the dojo without effort. "Others must be earned through respect." He turned to Hiroshi, who bowed deeply to him. Daniel, after a moment's hesitation, followed suit. Around the room, students began to rise from their seats, bowing one by one. Even Caleb reluctantly inclined his head in acknowledgement. As Clarence looked around at the faces turned toward him, some in awe, some in confusion, a few still in disbelief, he knew that his careful masquerade had ended. The storm had arrived, bringing with it winds of change that would sweep through Rising Phoenix Karate Academy, transforming everyone in their path. The aftermath of Challenge Day left the dojo in chaos. Parents and students lingered, buzzing with questions and excitement, while Laura frantically tried to maintain order. "Everyone, please," she clapped her hands. "Thank you for attending. The demonstration is over. We'll see you at regular classes next week." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Daniel approached Clarence, who stood quietly beside Hiroshi. Daniel's face was a storm of emotions, confusion, embarrassment, and a dawning respect. "My office," he said simply. "Now." Clarence nodded, following Daniel to the back of the dojo. Laura hurried after them, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Hiroshi joined without invitation, his dignified presence making it impossible for anyone to object. The office was small, with motivational posters covering the walls and trophies lining a shelf behind the desk. Daniel closed the door and turned to face Clarence. "What the hell was that? 6 months you've been coming here, pretending to be a beginner." "What?" Laura cut in before Clarence could respond. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" "Your reputation will only be enhanced," Hiroshi interrupted smoothly. "Your dojo has hosted one of the greatest living masters of traditional karate. Many would consider this an honor." "An honor we didn't ask for," Laura snapped. "This deception undermines everything we've built." Clarence folded his hands in his lap, the picture of composure. "I understand your frustration. I didn't come here to disrupt your business or embarrass anyone." "Then why?" Daniel pressed. "Why the charade?" Clarence exchanged a glance with Hiroshi before responding. "My full name is Clarence Inoue Mitchell. My father was Robert Mitchell, an American serviceman stationed in Okinawa. My mother was Hannah Inoue, daughter of a local judo instructor." He paused, letting the information sink in. "I was born into two worlds, belonging fully to neither. In America, I was too Japanese. In Japan, I was too American. But martial arts transcends those boundaries," Hiroshi added. Clarence's talent was undeniable, even to traditionalists who resisted teaching foreigners. Daniel leaned against his desk, his anger gradually giving way to curiosity. "The Saito clan, they accepted you?" "Not at first," Clarence admitted. "But my mother's family had connections. I trained in secret for years before being formally admitted to the school." "You became my father's prize student," Hiroshi said. "The first non-Japanese person to master our family's techniques, but not everyone celebrated his success." Laura checked her watch impatiently. "This history lesson is fascinating, but it doesn't explain why you infiltrated our dojo under false pretenses." "I didn't infiltrate anything," Clarence replied calmly. "I simply wanted to practice in a formal setting again. After decades away from dojos, I thought it best to observe first to understand your teaching methods before revealing my background." "Decades away?" Daniel asked. "The international circuit lost track of you after 1974. You just disappeared." A shadow passed over Clarence's face. For good reason. Before he could elaborate, there was a knock at the door. Jordan poked his head in, looking flustered. "Sorry to interrupt, but you might want to see this." He held up his phone, displaying a social media page. A video was playing, Clarence performing an advanced kata in the park, his movements fluid and powerful. "It's going viral," Jordan said. "Someone named Lucas uploaded it last night. It already has thousands of views." Laura snatched the phone, her expression darkening as she watched. "Damage control," she muttered. "We need immediate damage control." Daniel looked at the video, then at Clarence. "That's not damage. That's beautiful." Outside in the main dojo area, most students had left, but Lucas, Caleb, and a few others remained, huddled together and speaking in excited whispers. "I can't believe I've been training with a legend," one of the younger students was saying. "My dad is going to freak out." "How did none of us see it?" another asked. "I mean, looking back, there were signs." Caleb remained quiet, lost in thought. When his phone buzzed, he checked it and frowned. "It's my dad. He saw Lucas's video and wanted me to come home immediately." Lucas touched his arm. "Are you okay? He sounded pretty intense last time you mentioned him." "I'll be fine," Caleb said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "He's probably just shocked." As Caleb left, Ethan approached the group, his earlier bravado replaced by sullen confusion. "This doesn't make any sense." If he's some champion, why slum here with us? Why pretend to be bad? Maybe he had his reasons, Lucas replied. Not everything is about you, Ethan. Ethan's face flushed. You've been Team Grandpa from the start. I bet you knew about this. I suspected, Lucas admitted, but I didn't know for sure until today. Traitor, Ethan muttered, but there was less conviction in his voice than usual. That evening, Caleb arrived home to find his father waiting in the living room, laptop open on the coffee table. Greg Nelson was a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a perpetual scowl. The video of Clarence was paused on the screen. Do you know who that is? Greg demanded without preamble. Caleb nodded. Clarence Mitchell. He trains at my dojo. Iron Fist Mitchell, Greg corrected. The man who beat Taro Yamada in '73. The only American to win at the Saito Invitational. His voice held a mixture of awe and bitterness. I watched his fights when I was training. He moved like nothing I'd ever seen. He turned to Caleb, his expression intense. This man has been at your dojo, training with you. Well, not exactly, Caleb admitted. He was pretending to be a beginner. No one knew until today. Greg slammed his fist on the table. And you didn't recognize greatness when it was right in front of you? I raised an idiot. Caleb flinched at his father's outburst, but stood his ground. How could I know? He was hiding who he was. A true martial artist sees beyond the surface, Greg growled. I want you training with him. Whatever it takes. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Dad, you don't think. That's the problem. Greg stood, towering over his son. Fix it. Get close to him. Learn everything you can. Caleb left his father's house with a knot in his stomach. His relationship with his father had always been complicated, but this new pressure felt different. More urgent, more desperate. Meanwhile, across town, Lucas sat in his bedroom, watching the view count on his video of Clarence Mitchell climb. He hadn't expected it to spread so quickly, but once a few martial arts blogs picked it up, it exploded. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Hesitantly, he answered. Is this Lucas Tran? A woman's voice asked. This is Maria Lopez from Black Belt magazine. We're doing a feature on Clarence Mitchell's return to the martial arts world. I understand you're a student. Lucas's eyes widened. Yes, I train at the same dojo, but perfect. We'd love to interview you about what it's like to train with a living legend. By morning, Rising Phoenix Karate Academy was surrounded by reporters. Local news vans parked in the strip mall lot, and a steady stream of curious onlookers peered through the windows. Laura arrived early, immediately pulling the blinds and locking the door. This is a nightmare, she muttered, checking her phone. We've had over 300 messages since last night. Daniel joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Actually, I think it's an opportunity. Do you know how many dojos would kill for this kind of publicity? Publicity we can't control, Laura snapped. Our brand is about modern, accessible martial arts, not some ancient, mystical nonsense. Our brand, Daniel repeated slowly, should be about authentic martial arts taught with integrity. Maybe we've lost sight of that. Before Laura could respond, there was a knock at the back door. Daniel opened it to find Hiroshi Sato standing there, impeccably dressed as always. We have a situation, Hiroshi said without preamble. Someone else is watching the dojo. Of course they are, Laura said. Every martial arts enthusiast in the state is watching us now. Hiroshi shook his head. Not enthusiasts. Someone dangerous. A man named Takuya has connections in this country. His network has been tracking Clarence for years. Takuya, Daniel frowned. The fight promoter from the Tokyo Underground Circuit? The same, Hiroshi confirmed. Clarence's victory over his champion cost him millions in gambling losses. His reputation never recovered. That was 50 years ago, Laura protested. Surely he's moved on. Some wounds never heal, Hiroshi said gravely, especially those inflicted on pride and honor. Later that afternoon, Clarence arrived for his regular class to find the dojo transformed. Students who had previously ignored or mocked him now bowed deeply as he entered. Others approached tentatively, asking for autographs or photos. In the midst of the commotion, Ethan confronted Lucas by the water fountain, his face flushed with anger. Nice video, he said, his voice low. Guess you'll do anything for likes. even betray the dojo. Lucas stood his ground. I didn't betray anyone. The truth was going to come out eventually. You're a traitor to the team, Ethan insisted, stepping closer. First, you defend him, then you expose him online. What's your angle? Maybe I just recognize real talent when I see it, Lucas shot back. And maybe you should grow up and stop acting like everything's a competition you need to win. Something in Lucas's tone, a new confidence perhaps, caught Ethan off guard. When Lucas pushed past him, Ethan didn't try to stop him. That evening, long after classes had ended, the dojo was silent and dark. A figure moved through the shadows, expertly picking the lock on the back door. Once inside, the intruder moved with purpose, overturning equipment racks and slashing practice mats with a knife. The destruction was methodical, almost ritualistic. When it was complete, the intruder spray-painted a single Japanese character on the wall-length mirror. Haji shame. Morning revealed the devastation. Daniel stood amidst the wreckage, his face grim. Laura paced the floor, already on the phone with the insurance company. Students gathered outside, shocked by the vandalism. This is what your legend has brought us, Laura hissed at Daniel. Destruction and chaos. This isn't about Clarence, Daniel replied. It's about something much older and darker. Across town, Clarence knelt before a simple gravestone in the local cemetery. The name Eleanor Marie Mitchell was etched in the granite, along with the dates 1947 to 2007. He placed a small piece of black belt fabric at the base of the stone. They found me, Eleanor, he said softly, just like you always said they would. He traced the letters of her name with his fingertips. You died protecting me from Takuya's men. I won't let your sacrifice be in vain. A light footstep behind him made Clarence turn. Daniel stood a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets. I'm sorry to intrude, he said. Hiroshi told me I might find you here. Clarence rose slowly, his knees protesting. My wife, he explained, gesturing to the grave. She was a nurse, but also a martial artist. We met at a tournament in California after I left Japan. Daniel stepped closer. The dojo was vandalized last night. I heard, Clarence said. I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to your door. That's actually why I'm here, Daniel admitted. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, for not seeing you for who you are. He hesitated, then added, and for not standing up when the students disrespected you. Clarence studied him thoughtfully. Apology accepted. But I sense there's more. Daniel nodded. I want to learn from you. Not just techniques, but philosophy, approach. I've been teaching for 15 years, but last night I realized how little I actually know. From his bag, Clarence withdrew a small leather-bound book. My father-in-law's teachings, he said, offering it to Daniel. Perhaps this is a place to start. Daniel accepted the book with reverence, bowing slightly. Thank you, Sensei. The next morning, during open sparring at the dojo, a stranger entered. He was Japanese, perhaps 30, with close-cropped hair and intense eyes. He wore a plain black GI with no school insignia, and his white belt was clearly new, never washed. I wish to challenge your highest-ranking fighter, he announced, his English precise but accented. Daniel approached, extending his hand. I'm Sensei Daniel Harper. We don't typically allow drop-in challenges, but not you, the man interrupted, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Clarence, who had just emerged from the locker room. Him! A hush fell over the dojo as the stranger walked directly to Clarence and bowed deeply but stiffly. Clarence, in no way Mitchell, he said. I have waited a long time for this honor. Clarence studied him, his expression giving away nothing, but those closest to him noticed a subtle shift in his posture, a tensing of his shoulders. What is your name? He asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew. Kenzo, he replied. Kenzo Takuya. Clarence's whisper was barely audible. Takuya-san. The young man's eyes flashed with recognition before he turned and walked to the center of the mat, assuming a fighting stance that was distinctly different from the style taught at Rising Phoenix. Clarence joined him on the mat, and for a moment, they simply regarded each other, 2 points in a constellation of fate that had been forming for decades. The dojo had fallen completely silent. Even those who didn't understand the significance of the name Takuya could feel the tension crackling in the air. Daniel moved to intervene, but Hiroshi placed a restraining hand on his arm. "This was inevitable," the older man murmured. "Some stories must reach their conclusion." Clarence and Kenzo circled each other on the mat, neither rushing to engage. Their movements are measured, precise, two predators assessing each other's capabilities. Kenzo struck first, a lightning-fast combination that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Clarence moved with equal speed, deflecting and redirecting his attacks with minimal movement. No wasted energy, no flashy techniques, just perfect timing and positioning. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, yet contained dozens of techniques. When they separated, both remained untouched. "You honor your father's teaching," Clarence said quietly. Kenzo's eyes narrowed. "Do not speak of him." They engaged again, more intensely this time. Kenzo's style was aggressive, modern, a blend of traditional karate with elements of kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. Clarence's approach was purely classical, yet he adapted seamlessly to the hybrid attacks. Again, neither landed a decisive blow, though Kenzo came close with a spinning back kick that Clarence evaded by a hair's breadth. The spectators watched in awe. This was nothing like the point sparring they were accustomed to. This was combat as art, a dialogue of bodies that spoke of history and inherited pain. Kenzo launched a final furious assault, a combination so complex and fast that even Daniel, a seasoned competitor, could barely follow it. Yet Clarence not only defended, but countered at the perfect moment, slipping inside Kenzo's guard to touch his chest with an open palm. He could have struck him. Everyone knew it. Instead, he simply made contact, a demonstration of control that was more devastating than any blow. Kenzo froze, his attack nullified. For a heartbeat, they remained locked in that position, Clarence's palm against his heart. Then Kenzo disengaged, bowed stiffly, and left without another word. As the door closed behind him, Clarence let out a long, measured breath. Hiroshi approached, concern evident in his lined face. "That was Takuya's son," he confirmed gravely. "He moves like his father, but with more restraint." "He found me," Clarence said softly. "After all these years." "Not by accident," Hiroshi replied. "This is only the beginning."